Hello, everyone. This is Scott Butcher, Vice President of JDB Engineering and JDB Acuity, and I'm here to talk to you today about post-processing. I recently did a photo shoot of Hershey's Chocolate World, which is the most visited corporate visitor center in the United States, and it's a very interesting space. There's a lot of highlights, there's a lot of dark areas, and I want to take what looks to be a unusable photo and make it a good tool for my marketing kit. Now, I'm the author of a free ebook, which I will put a link in the comments section here on YouTube. And the book is Simplified Project Photography, a guide for DIY architectural photographers. And the intent of the book is for those of us that need to go out and get photos of our projects, be they interiors, building exteriors, mechanical rooms, bridges, or other structures. Um, and we're not hiring a professional photographer. Maybe we need a quick photo for a proposal. Maybe we don't have the budget for a professional. Maybe we're going to hire the professional in a little while, but we haven't got there yet and we need some images. Whatever the case may be, we go out. We don't have all the tools and techniques of the professional. If you look at this space in the photo, professional is going to come in here and they're going to do a lot of supplemental lighting. Maybe they're going to add the lights, spend an hour setting up for that perfect shot, or maybe they're going to walk around with a flash or a strobe and pop it off multiple times in a single exposure, or pop it off in different areas and combine multiple exposures. These are all techniques used by professional architectural photographers. But you and me, we're going to go out, we're going to take our tripod, because that is a very important tool, and we're going to put our camera on it, and we're going to take a photo and come back and try to kick it up in post-processing. Now, these techniques I'm going to show you today, you can use no matter what your camera is. So if you use your iPhone and you got back and you need to do some editing, use these techniques. Just understand that if you're using something that is saving as JPEG, you don't have as much latitude as I'm going to show you today. I'm shooting RAW files. RAW gives me a lot more data that allows me to change exposures and make other fine-tune adjustments that with a JPEG you can't do. With a JPEG, there's a compression taking place and there's sharpening and noise reduction being applied in camera. To give you an idea with the camera I'm using, my JPEGs are about 5 megabytes, my RAW files are about 25 megabytes. So there's a lot more data being captured. As far as this photo, I used an exposure time of 1.3 seconds, so I definitely needed the tripod. I shot at f16. The idea here is like an f16 and f22 is going to give you really good depth of field. So I have sharpness in the foreground and sharpness in the distance, which is something really important for interior projects. And I used a lens that was 16 to 50 millimeters. I had it open the whole way, so 16 millimeters to get a wide angle. And then finally, my ISO setting was 100. This is critical, and this is something if you're using your cell phone to take a photo, your hand holding, it's going to have a really high ISO. That's okay, but it adds a lot of digital noise that's going to be difficult to get rid of. And depending upon what you use the photos for, if you want to enlarge or crop, you're going to be limited because of that digital noise and the pixelization that occurs. So with all that as background, let's get to processing this photo. You'll see I have 3 photos here. Typically when I go on site for some project photography, I'm going to bracket plus or minus 2 stops. So these photos are the 3 I took in this series. This one is what the camera said was the proper exposure. This is 2 stops below it. And then this is 2 stops overexposed. Why would I do this? Well, to be honest with you, 90% of the time, I'm only going to edit that first photo, the one that's supposedly in camera exposure perfect, which we can see it's not. But sometimes I need to pull details. Just look at the Hershey's Chocolate World sign here. Looks great when it's underexposed, totally blown out when it's overexposed. And here it's not bad, but it's not as good. So sometimes I'm combining elements of multiple photos. In extreme cases, I might merge the three photos together in a technique known as exposure fusion, which is taking the best of each image and pulling it together. But I'm really happy using Adobe Lightroom, which is the software I'm using today, and going through this process I'm about to show you. In the book, I talk about a 3-minute technique just to go through and do quick edits and have a usable photo. With this tutorial, I'm going to go in more depth because this photo kind of demands uh, a lot more attention. So I'm going to walk you through my normal process. It's nothing that's proprietary. It's nothing that's a secret. It's actually the process that Lightroom tells you to use. They've got all these tools on the panel on the right side of the screen here, and I'm just going to walk through these and make adjustments, and then we're going to go through and we're going to fine tune. So we'll start with the treatment here. And with the treatment, we have the white balance and we have the tone. And so a good place to start here is your color or your white balance. And you can see here, this is signifying as shot. When I click my options here, I get these because it's a raw photo. And I could say, okay, well, there was tungsten lighting, and it really skews towards the blue. I could say, no, it was fluorescent lighting, and now it's adding more magenta into it. I could say I used a flash, so it's becoming much more yellow because it's assuming there was blue light, so it's trying to counteract that. Auto is what it's recommending, and then I could also do custom, and that's what I'm going to do here. I played around with this before I started the tutorial and decided that 3400 was the ideal color temperature for this image. Now I want to mention as I'm going through this, I'm using a laptop. And I'm actually using my mouse trackpad, which makes it a little more difficult. But I also have two screens. I have my laptop screen as well as a secondary computer monitor, and the colors are vastly different between the two. And this is something you're going to have to deal with. You're going to have perhaps multiple screens. A lot of people do today. And they may or may not be calibrated with your output. For a lot of us, we have multiple outputs. So my marketing materials are printed on a laser printer. But then if I want photo enlargements around the building, I might print on an inkjet printer. The laser printer is 4-color, the inkjet is 8-color. Or I might send these out to a photo processor. They're also going to be viewed online. They might be incorporated into a video. So there's going to be differences in color casts, and you're going to have to be aware of that. And sometimes I might even tweak the white balance and save multiple images for multiple uses. So with that stated, I like the 3400 here for this photo. The tint, which is your green and magenta slider, I'm not even going to mess with. You're not seeing fluorescent lighting here. I typically only mess with those if I have fluorescence or if I have some sort of color cast. And you might be seeing a color cast up here in the ceiling. This sign goes through multiple colors. It's blue, it's magenta, it's white, it's green, and every time it changes, we get this color cast up in the ceiling. So here I might use that slider to tone that down, but that's deeper into our tutorial. So now we're going to jump down to tone. And with tone, your first two options are exposure and contrast. The technique I'm going to show you, I actually learned from the internet several years ago. It entails adjusting highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks before you worry about exposure and contrast. So we're going to take our highlights here, grab the slider all the way to the left at -100. As I'm doing this, look at that Hershey's sign. It's recapturing some of the detail, so it's not so blown out. If you also look at this light up in the ceiling, you can see the highlights. When I take that down, it brings back some of that detail. Likewise with the shadow here. As I adjust this one, I want you to look in the retail area. This is the lobby of Hershey's Chocolate World, and this is a retail area. Open up the shadows to 100%, and the photo gets much brighter, and we can actually start to see some detail back here. We can bring that out further, but for starters, this is a good place. White balance, I'm going to hit next, and to do this, I'm going to hold down my Alt key and then click the button, and I get this black screen. And what I'm doing here is I'm setting the white point. If I just drag to the right, all the detail you see burning through the black screen is going to essentially be blown out. It's going to be full white. That's too bright. That's definitely too bright. So I'm going to go back down here and tweak this. I might even go negative a little bit because I just want a couple dots of light showing through because that's the white point. So you have that here in this sign. Everything else is going to have some level of detail and not be blown out. Next, I'll do the same thing for the blacks. Hold down the Alt key, click the button, and here I want to add some contrast back in. So as I adjust my slider, anything that is a solid black is going to be a solid black in the photo. And then the colored areas are going to be a darker grayscale, but not full black. So I'm content right about here, minus 43. Brings a lot of the detail back. If you look here with the tools that Adobe provides, on your keyboard is a backslash, not a backsplash. If you hit that at any given time, it's going to take you back to the original. So you can see the adjustments we've made. They're subtle, but it's a huge difference in the quality of the photo, but it's still pretty dark. So now that I've adjusted my highlights and shadows, I've adjusted my whites and blacks, I'm going to go up to my exposure and I'm going to tweak that. And I'm going to grab that. 0.71 seems too much, 0.24 is not enough. I can actually go in the box and click and manually enter. I like the 0.5. I can also take my cursor right over top of the box, take my left mouse button and drag left or right, or drag the slider. So there's 3 ways to make the adjustments. I like that adjustment because I have good detail here. It's not blown out. Still want to do some tweaking back here. Need to do some tweaking up in the ceiling, but I like this adjustment. When we changed the blacks, we brought back contrast, so I'm not going to be too extreme with that, but just a tad bit more. Next up, we have presence, and presence is something to be very wary about with interior spaces. Vibrance and saturation can hugely negatively impact the photo. Clarity is a tool similar to sharpening, but it is different. It's its own tool. Outdoors, particularly when you have skies with white puffies, you can do really cool things with the clarity slider. Interiors, I don't adjust too much. It does help bring out some detail, so minus 12, minus 15, somewhere in that range is pretty good. Vibrance, I usually ignore. However, we've got this great colorful wall here, and I want to kick that up a little bit because I want to make that the focal point of my photo. So I'm going to tweak that, maybe a plus 21 here. It definitely makes a difference. You can do the before, after. So the wall is much more colorful. Saturation can really make your photos wonky. It can become real cartoonish, which you don't want. That's if you go positive. If you go negative saturation, it is a tool that you can use to adjust color cast. Particularly if you have a white area that's taking on a color cast and you take the saturation down, it's not going to impact the color of the photo because it's supposed to be white anyway. But everywhere else there's colors, when you make the saturation adjustments, it's just a uniform adjustment that we're typically going to avoid. So I'm going to reset that to 0. At any time, you can double click on these sliders and they'll reset to 0. Next up, Adobe provides different ways to make color adjustments. So your hue, saturation, luminance are one way. Hue is the hue of the color, the tone of the color. Saturation allows you to saturate or desaturate certain colors. For instance, another way to get rid of a yellow color cast is to go to saturation, click the yellow color, slide it to the left. Problem here is that we have this colorful wall with lots of yellow, and we're losing it. We're losing the vibrance. Just take a look at the Hershey Kiss here, the first level surrounding it. When we change this slider, we're losing all the saturation in the yellow, and we don't want to do that. So this is useful for really focusing in on certain colors and making minor tweaks. Let's skip it. I usually skip it. Every once in a while I do go back and need to make some adjustments. Next up, we want detail, and that's our sharpening and noise reduction. Because I have a raw file, there is no sharpening employed in the camera. By default, Adobe adds 25. I like to go up around 50 for this camera, but I'm going to mask it. And with masking, the idea is we don't need to sharpen everything. We only want to sharpen edges. So I hold down my Alt key, click the left mouse button, I get this white screen, and as I drag it to the right, everything that appears black is not going to be sharpened. And the idea is like long expanses of wall where there's no shadows, anywhere where there's no detail, we don't need to sharpen. It only adds noise. So I took that to 35. I think that's good for this photo. Noise reduction, I do know I have noise even though I shot on ISO 100 to specifically minimize the noise. If you have 800, 1200, 6400, you're going to have digital noise. And the luminance tool is a great way to get rid of it, but it also blurs. So keep that in mind. Sharpening adds sharp edges, but noise reduction is actually doing blurring. And so here with my camera and an interior at ISO 100, I know maybe 25 to 30, somewhere in that range is good for noise reduction. And that's all I'm going to mess with in this tool. Next, I go down to the lens correction. And I'm going to start with remove chromatic aberration. These are the little yellow and turquoise or even pink lines that sometimes appear when you zoom way in the photo. That's just an issue with the lens. And so I normally click that by default. And you can see Adobe had already selected Enable Profile Corrections. Adobe has a great database of lenses, and they know what the defects are with each given lens. And so you can see here, it automatically sensed that I was using a Sony DT 60 to 50 millimeter and has a profile for that. And what it's doing is it's correcting the barrel distortion of the lens as well as vignetting that may be taking place at the corners. So you see how dark it is up in the upper right corner, and now I click this and it lightens up a lot. So I use this tool. I let Adobe do what Adobe wants to do. And then finally is the transform tool. And when we're dealing with architecture, unless you're doing something creative, it's really important that your verticals are actually vertical. Right? We don't want parallax or the keystone effect. Try to get it as close as you can in camera to having all your verticals vertical. And then there's a number of different tools here. Transform allows you to make all these manual adjustments, but Adobe does a pretty good job with auto. You click auto, it tweaked it. You can see this vertical is now vertical. If you hover over top of the vertical slider, it creates this grid. It allows you to double check your verticals, and I'm pretty happy with this. And then this tool down here, constrain crop. Sometimes you're doing some major adjustments to the verticals and you're rotating the photo and you're getting white areas on the top or bottom of your photo, and constrain crop will just adjust that automatically. In this case, we didn't need to use it. So that's my first pass at post-processing. Again, if I were doing this in a non-tutorial environment, that's probably 3 minutes of effort. So the photo is a huge improvement to what we have. But guess what? We can go in and do some finer tuning now. And so that's the next step of the tutorial here. So I've used all the major tools in the palette here to the right. And now I'm going to use these tools. We have a crop tool, a spot removal. This is if your lens has dust on it. There's even, like if you click that and go down here to visualize spots, you can look through here and look for random dots that shouldn't be there. And that will tell you where you have spots on your camera, and you use the tool. And it does a pretty intuitive job of finding an area in the photo that mimics the area where the dust is and fixing that. Red eye reduction we don't have to worry about. Graduated filter can be very useful. Radial filter you're not going to use as much in interiors. Where I usually focus is this adjustment brush, and that's where we're going to get started today. So you hit your adjustment brush, double click on effect, and that takes everything down to 0. So any adjustment you make is going to be nothing. You'll have no adjustments as you start what's called painting on your photo, and then you can add in your adjustments afterward, or you can add in your adjustments beforehand. So for my first adjustment here, I think I'm going to open the shadows. And I want to do that in the ceiling. And so I'm just going to start here with a pretty broad painting over top. With my brush here, I have a very large circle in the center. You can see that solid line. Everything within there is going to be essentially adjusted to 100%. And then that outer circle, which is fainter, that's my feathering. And you can adjust that down here, size, feather. I like using the feather brush because then you have a nice transition. You don't have hard lines when you're making the adjustments. And all I'm doing right now is trying to open up the ceiling. It's pretty dark. I want to make it a little whiter. Down here, I use this tool a lot, Show Selected Mask Overlay. So now that's showing you where I am making these adjustments. And with your right bracket and left bracket, you can increase or decrease the size of your circle. And I want to go right up to this Hershey sign here, but I don't want to paint over top of it. Likewise, I want to get all these pipes down and through here, get the white over here. We're going to do another treatment for this ceiling, so this is a pretty good start. And you can see I did a little bit. I painted over a little bit of the Hershey bar here. So just by holding down Alt, you get a negative. So this allows you to paint away what you painted on. So you're painting here, you make a mistake, whoops, you could hit undo, or you could just hit the Alt key. Make this a little bigger here. And just paint over top of it, so you're essentially deselecting for your effect. So that's unselect the mask overlay, and once again Adobe gives you a pretty cool before after. So this is only showing us what's happening with this adjustment brush. You can see I made the adjustment in the ceiling here. I actually think it's still too dark, so I'm going to go to exposure, bring that up slightly. That might be too much. Let's try 0.15 for this. You can always go in and double process, and that allows you to put different layers on it, which is a nice effect. What I'm going to do now is in fact do that because we have some color contamination here from the sign. So I'm going to hit new. I can go back, reset my effect, and this time around I'm going to make some further adjustments. So let's see, I'm going to bring shadows up again. And we can start at 100, we can always make the change. Bring adjustment up, and I think I need to desaturate because this is only a white area that I'm dealing with. So let's take that down to 100%, and again we can always adjust it. And I'm just painting over where I have the color contamination. You can see this is a pretty extreme adjustment. We're getting rid of that magenta. We're opening up the whites. And I could have made these adjustments on that original adjustment brush as well. But I like to do it in multiple layers. That way it's easier to go in and make changes to. I don't want to go anywhere where there's color, because this negative saturation is going to impact it. But you can see here I'm really opening things up now. My whites are getting white. Need to make this brush a little bit smaller to go in. And once again, I can do my mask overlay. Now as my adjustment brush gets smaller, so does the amount of feathering. So I want to go right up to this blue here, but not really hit the blue. I got a little bit there. Because I don't want to desaturate colors. And you can see up top I got a little bit of the Hershey. This brush smaller. Kind of fine tune my work here. At the corner. Looks like I didn't get everything here, so I need to paint back in. Got a little bit of the Hershey sign here. Are these visuals making you hungry? They're making me hungry. I'm ready for a Hershey bar. All right, I am content with this. As you can see as we go through this, the 3-minute exercise kind of gets you started, but there's a lot of other work that can be done, and you may choose to do along the way to really improve the quality of your photo. So now the ceiling is really well illuminated. It is white. I like that. But what I don't like is this filters have negatively impacted the light. So one thing I can do here, go back to my original adjustment, and let's do the overlay. So this is the one that brightened the ceiling, but it didn't change the color tones. I'm just going to use my negative adjustment brush. And I'm just going to paint over that light a little bit to try to bring back some detail. Still somewhat blown out, so let's do a new brush here. I'm going to reset my effects once again. And I think for this, I'm going to pull out my highlights, tweak the exposure negative, and just go right over top of that light. And this is a way, you're not going to have a lot of detail in the light, but it is a way that allows you to try to bring some of it back. We have lighting designers on our team, so it's always important to me to try to highlight what it is they're doing. This light here, you can see there's some detail in it, but I'll go ahead, get a real small adjustment brush, and try to bring some of that detail back as well. So now that looks good. Now next up, what do you notice? Well, I notice it's pretty dark through here. There's actually some brownish, purplish, not that dissimilar from the Hershey bar color. So let's try to bring some of that back. Going to hit another new one here. Reset my effects. Turn the mask on for this, because I definitely want to know where I am. Painting over top of it now, and then right now there's no effects applied to it, but we are going to change that shortly. You know what, I'll get the white here too. Turn the mask off so I can see what I'm dealing with. And actually, let's just start with the shadows. Pull out the shadows. It brightened a little bit. You can tell there's a little purple there. One of the things you have to watch is when you're adjusting exposures, it can really make things look wrong, really wonky. So everything you're going to do is going to be a very subtle effect. Even that, I think, is a little too much. And that's not enough. Let's try 0.15. I think that looks pretty good. But I am going to double process here, and I'm going to do this whole area. So we're going to do a new adjustment brush again, reset my effects. Can make my brush a little bigger here. Try that again. All right. Now I'm doing nothing, so let's figure out what I want to do, and what I want to do is open the shadows. Painting over top. Can go up in the ceiling here to open the shadows a little bit, but we're going to be making some adjustments here as well. This is a very, very subtle effect, but I have the area painted. And I don't need it on the floor, because we have a tool for that as well. I'm going to go in over here, get that, but we don't need it on the sign. That's probably good enough for what I need. Deselect. So now let me show you here. If I take the shadows back to 0, you see it getting darker? And I could take the shadows all the way down, but I want to increase them, just open up that area. I actually think I could add a tiny bit of exposure. Yeah, that's better. Oh, I lost it. That was, I think, 0.35. So it's bringing more detail, more information is coming forward here. Next up, I'm going to do another new adjustment brush. Take my effect to 0. And I'm going to mess around with the ceiling here. This black ceiling with these acoustical clouds. It's pretty cool. It's a really neat effect for the space. It makes photography kind of a little more difficult. And I don't know if you caught it, what I did right there is I accidentally grabbed this dot and it shifted things. So just let me Control Z to undo that. And make my brush a little smaller to get up in here. I don't need to do too much there. Oops, and I got the Hershey sign. So that's throw that away here. All right, so that's what we're dealing with. I'm going to turn my mask off, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the white point and drag it right so it's really kicking up those acoustical clouds, making them pop. And I could actually further then take my black down a little bit to darken that ceiling. I don't want it too dark, so maybe I'll leave it where it is because the clouds really do pop. So I love that effect. Now, this Hershey here sort of mimics the famous smokestacks that stand over Hershey, but I'm going to bring that out a little bit. So I have another new one here. Effect is 0. And actually all I'm going to do is drag the highlight slider to 100% and paint over top of it. And it actually has the effect of making my bricks a little darker and it makes the Hershey pop a little more. And now I think I have one more adjustment I'm going to make, and that is this floor. This is a great shiny reflective floor, but why don't we go ahead and shine it ourselves. So I'll do a new brush. Again, reset the effect, even though it was set at -100 in highlights, and that's what I want to do. So bring a nice big brush into the equation. Got this wonderful tile work in the foreground. And as I go over top of it, see how it appears that it's making things darker? What it's doing is it's just getting rid of the highlight. And it's helping to make the floor pop. It's helping to improve the contrast in the floor. And it's almost like we're going through when we're shining the floor. So I don't trust my eye for this. So once again, I use this mask overlay tool. Make sure I get it painted pretty well. Again, you don't have to be perfect here because you do have the transitional effects of the sort of the graduated circle here that goes from 100% to 0%. So as long as you're close, you're in pretty good shape. Let's turn that off. So let's look at what we've done. And first, let's turn on and off all these adjustment brushes. And you do that with this tool here. That's where we started. And this is where we are now. Makes a huge, huge difference. And if we use that bracket tool again, get our before and after, and this is a pretty massive difference that you're seeing now. That I wouldn't use in my marketing. This, absolutely, I'd love to use this in my marketing. I have one other idea to try here, and with that I'm going to use one more adjustment brush. And take my effect to 0. Going to turn on the mask, and I'm going to paint over this Hershey's wall here and these characters that are greeting visitors as they walk in. If you haven't been to Chocolate World, haven't been to Hershey Park, you have to make it something on your bucket list to do. It's a big roller coaster park at Hershey Park. They have 15 or 16 coasters now, but there's other rides to do. There's a water park that's part of Hershey Park. Hershey is very much a company town founded by Milton Hershey. And of course, It's where our Hershey chocolate comes from. The big West chocolate plant there is just, it's massive. The town smells good. The street lights are Hershey Kisses. And while you're there, you can go into Chocolate World for free. As I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial, it's the most visited corporate visitor center in the country. And there's a reason for it. There's a ride you can go on to see how chocolate is made. There's a big retail shop. There's every type of Hershey's chocolate imaginable. And what I'm doing here, I'm really just rambling to stall because it takes a while to paint this sign. Trying to get that Hershey sign painted in, trying to get everything around it deselected. So right now I have that negative adjustment brush, holding down my Alt key. And now just go over top everything in the middle again to make sure I got it. When you're dealing with like white colors, it's pretty easy to see the mask overlay, but certain colors, it's much harder because it's a very subtle effect, which is why it's worth taking your time and getting this right. Now, I don't know if I'm going to use this adjustment brush or not, but I do know that I'm going to try it. I think we're there. All right, so let's deselect that. So I've made no adjustments. I've just painted on a new layer here. And what I'm wondering is, we got the color tone perfect in the ceiling. We got rid of that magenta. We adjusted so we didn't have too much yellow that we had in that original image. So we added blue. But did this get too blue? Or is it good as is? So let's just try our temperature slider. And what happens when we tweak this? Bring back a little bit more of the yellow. Well, it certainly saturates the colors. Obviously, this is extreme. We wouldn't want to do that. Look at how it changed the color within the Hershey sign. But if we're 10 or 15, 13 here, I think that might be more realistic. We certainly don't want to go blue. Add too much blue into the photo. Then that takes our sign and it skews it blue. When we add a little yellow, it definitely brings out the colors a little more. We could certainly go down if we wanted to and make other adjustments. Clarity, bring the sign down a little more. Set your black and white point. But I'm content with this adjustment. So let's do this before and after one more time. I'm trying to bring back what I saw when I walked through and took the photo, and obviously I don't remember exactly how the color tones were. So I'm doing what looks good to me, what looks good on my monitor. Keep in mind, as you watch this tutorial, you are actually seeing different colors than I'm seeing because of the way your monitor is calibrated. And if you watch this on your phone and you watch it on your laptop or your PC or your MacBook, you might see different colors on each different device. And again, that's a function of the calibration. So that's why you get on a website and colors might seem a little off. It's just the way the photos were processed. But this has been a pretty long tutorial. We're just about 40 minutes into it. Far cry from my preferred 3-minute editing, which I like to do, but sometimes you have to do a deep dive and you have to make tons of small, subtle adjustments. And you see that here with our adjustment brushes. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have at least 7, no, there's 8. We have at least 8 adjustment brushes. Each one tweaking something a little differently. I could go in again, now that I'm looking at this, I'm looking at some of these acoustical clouds, and it does look like there is a little bit of color contamination. So I can go back here, select that. We can see there's no colors impacted. It's only on the black and white areas. And I could try to adjust that further by using these sliders here. But I also have the saturation slider. And if I make that negative saturation, it fixes it without impacting anything else negatively. What do you think of that? Does that look good? That's where it was. That's negative saturation. I like it. It's making my whites white, and that's really what I'm after here. So I hope this was informative and useful. I hope you take some photos and pop into Photoshop. Remember, because I shot raw, I have more latitude, but I have to be honest with you, I've taken some JPEGs and done some pretty extreme edits to them, like I showed you today, and they've turned out okay. It depends upon the megapixels you have available, and that's the resolution of your photo, um, and it depends upon how extreme the contrasts are. And you can certainly use these tools with JPEGs. You can get some excellent results out of them. Anytime somebody comes back from the field at my company, they're always giving me JPEGs to edit, and I can tweak them pretty significantly. But that is our tutorial, Adobe Lightroom at Hershey's Chocolate World. Hope you find value in it, and I wish you happy shooting and happy editing. Good luck.